Hello, everybody. I'm Maurice Carlos Ruffin, and welcome to Maurice Carlos Ruffin's Sitting in Silence. This is the second video episode of the podcast that I've been doing now for uh, about a year and 8 months, give or take. And as longtime listeners and viewers know, I never have a plan for these things. But of course, I'm releasing this on a day of great significance for people from where I'm from, New Orleans, the Gulf Coast, from Texas to Florida. And, it's so strange because I'm a Gen X person. I'm not sure if you can tell that. I'm not Gen Z or millennial or alpha, obviously. I'm a Gen X person. As a Gen X person, as a person who came of age in the 90s, really, this was the time of, um, picture it, kids, Sicily, 1922. No, seriously. This was a time of great disaffection. The idea then was to not show that you cared about things, was to play it as cool as possible. And, the main bands were Nirvana and Pearl Jam. Um, and that was the vibe. If you showed that you were trying, then you were basically failing because you shouldn't be trying it. It's a whole separate conversation. Maybe it's the reason why in sort of modern culture we skipped from boomers to millennials and Gen Z kind of disappeared. But that's a whole separate thing. But I guess the reason why I'm saying this is because I think my generation, we were the ones that kind of encountered cringe in a way. And I'm not getting into that whole conversation. That's a separate thing. What I'm trying to say is this. Um, as a kid of the 90s and even the 80s, because I was in college in the late 90s, we would often have these TV shows called sitcoms. And every once in a while, you have the very special episode. They started doing this like in, I think, the mid to late 70s. They kind of carried through into the 90s or so, um, where a normally light uh, program would suddenly shift into a really big topic. The topic would be drug use or sexual abuse or adoption or some character got killed off screen and everybody has to deal with that. And again, as a Gen X person, of course, I grew up watching that stuff and it was fine, and yet one can't help but roll his eyes at that because it was so on the nose, and yet we contain multitudes. I'm a very on the nose person, and as this 20th anniversary approached, it didn't sneak up on me at all. Some years I'm not paying attention to Hurricane Katrina's anniversary, but I had been commissioned many months ago now, I think way back in December of 2024, to write a piece for a publication from the Louisiana Endowment of Humanities called 64 Parishes. That's the name of the magazine. I've done the piece. It's actually not out yet, I don't think, but it'll be out pretty soon. But it definitely got me in the mind thinking about this all year long. And as a creative person, you're always trying to be in your life, whatever that means to you. Um, Here we're sitting in silence. The overall vibe of sitting in silence, I hope this is how it comes across, is a place of joy, a place of hope, a place of moving forward, a place of possibility. And so, all that being said, when I was considering what to do with sitting in silence during this time, one of the things I said was just don't even mention it. Just keep doing the typical, craft post and motivational posts and that kind of thing. Um, that was one extreme. Just don't bring it up. The other extreme, of course, was to do wall to wall coverage of the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. So, a post each day between the newsletter blog and the podcast and the video podcast and notes and all those kind of things. But I think that for me, I've always been somebody who winds up in the middle for the most part, especially when it comes to the art. So today I'm going to talk about this a little bit. And let's just see where it takes us. Because how, look, as a New Orleans person, it's about improvisation. It's about going to where the melody takes you and just finding the right notes. So before I get too deep into it, let me say thanks for being here. I do want to thank everybody who has subscribed and most especially the paid subscribers. A lot of folks signed up. over this past 3 month period. It's been really wonderful to see it because you're keeping the lights on. People that are paid subscribers keep this going. People who are not paying, I really appreciate that. Um, a lot of interesting DMs, people requesting that I cover certain topics, a lot of activity in the comment section. I think probably the most popular post, if you want to see for yourself, it's a toss up. The two most popular posts in the last, say, 3 months. One was the interview I did with Imani Perry, my friend Imani Perry. That was maybe a month or so ago, 3 weeks ago, somewhere in that range. And she is obviously a wonderful writer in person. She answered the questions. People liked experiencing that. And then the other big post was about 2 weeks ago, which was the one titled "Sorry, but no one wants to see your protagonist sit around." And that was one I had been thinking about for a long time. And I've been sort of edging towards an earlier um, post, which has probably had the most resonance of anything I've done. Literally, I was somewhere a couple of days ago. I think I was doing an event for my friend Clavis Terra, and somebody who I just sort of mentioned, like, I read this post of yours, and I just really, it really helped them in their own writing. So for everybody out there engaging, I really appreciate it. It's such a strange thing to be somebody who is posting and writing and doing videos and that kind of thing, because um, between the fact that these corporations, not Substack, right, but the other ones are like owned by these malignant billionaires, and then there's the algorithms that can make things invisible. It can be a bit of a grind sometimes, but this has not been a grind. So there's that. Uh, Please make sure that you go ahead and like, rate, and review Sitting in Silence. It really helps. People have been doing that. I pointed out, I think in last week's podcast, that the likes are showing up on Spotify, which is sort of my personal home for my podcast. And it's really been helping people find the podcast. I've been getting a lot more contacts from people out there in the world. Let's see what else. I am doing some events, so keep your eyes open for these events. I'll be in New York at NYU. There's an event that's going to take place at that university. It's the Thursday, I think it's the 18th of September. I'll be there with Michelle Fieldgate and I think Jakira Diaz and some other wonderful writers as well. We'll be reading excerpts from the book What My Father and I Don't Talk About, which is the follow-up to the bestseller What My Mother and I Don't Talk About. So September the 18th, if you're in the New York area, show up for that. I am doing, it's not confirmed yet, but if you have heard of a writer named Addie Kitchens, who has a wonderful book called Dominion, I think we're doing an event at some point in September, so keep your eyes open for that as well. I forget anything else. That may be it. I'm shutting things down for some medical stuff in October, which is going to be great. All right, so Katrina. Yeah, I really have been thinking about how to approach this today. And so I'm going to be direct and say that on the one hand, I'm not going to give you this sort of play-by-play of what I experienced during the event itself, but it's not going to be like this sort of bloodless, kumbaya type thing. I'll just give you a bit from column A, column B, give you the whole poo-poo platter, so to speak. All right, so if you've been paying attention, you probably saw that I posted on various social media in the past week that I would do a bunch of posts related to Hurricane Katrina. That was my decision, and that's what I've done for the past week. I've done several posts here. I've done things on Threads. I've done things other places as well. And in the Monday Substack newsletter, you probably saw that I had, at the beginning of the post, a bunch of pieces that I've written about Hurricane Katrina because, believe it or not, I've been writing about this situation for a very long time. I think the first piece that I published related to it was probably within 5 years of the storm, if not sooner than that. And I have done at least a dozen pieces, if not more than that, that have some sort of relationship to Hurricane Katrina. But let me state personal first, and then I'll move into some of the other stuff. All right. So who am I? I'm Maurice Carlos Ruffin. I'm an author. I'm a New Orleanian, native of New Orleans, even though I travel a lot and spend a lot of time close to Baton Rouge, where my university job is. But back in 2005, I was a baby. I was just 2 years old. No, I'm kidding. I wasn't 2 years old. In 2005, I was actually 20. Let's do the math on this for a second. So I turned 30, 20. I think I was about 27 or so. That sounds about right, I think. So, look, I'm born in 77. You do the math, I'm not hiding my age. At that time, I was I was a new lawyer working in New Orleans, downtown New Orleans, in a skyscraper. And at that point, I was living some version of a dream that I've been working towards for a long time. Um, as the legend goes, when I was in college, my dream was to be a lit professor, which was connected to an earlier dream where my parents and my grandmother would call me professor. That was my nickname in the household, little professor. I'm 11 years old. That's what they called me. Um, but for a lot of reasons, and mainly because I wanted to be a good provider, I decided to go to law school. All right. So I go to law school, become a lawyer, and everything is just kind of high flying at this point. It feels like the sky is the limit. And that's a weird saying because I feel like, going beyond the sky would be more impressive. So let's just say that. I feel like I could go beyond the sky. In the summer of 2005, I was a lawyer in one of the oldest law firms in town. Now, I was a junior lawyer, a baby lawyer, just a little associate. I had only a few responsibilities, but it was a pretty good job despite some things that I write about in a lot of my fiction. But good, stable job, good money. I'm doing that. And at this point, I'm even being sort of like courted by people who say, Maurice, you should like run for office one day, that kind of thing. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking about writing, whether it will be writing short stories of some type or taking some film writing classes and doing some scripts, that kind of thing. Uh, Family's in good shape. You know, I'm married. My parents are both doing their own thing. My brother's with his family in Atlanta. I got some friends who I don't see very much because I'm working so hard at that time, but they're out there and around. And I have a wide extended family who live across the entire New Orleans metropolitan area. Okay, and the short version of the story is that as a New Orleanian, as somebody from the Gulf Coast, um, we don't get too afraid of storms. If you can imagine, if you're somebody from say the Northeast of America, so I know maybe like 20% of my followers are New York people in that area. You know, you hear about a snowstorm blowing through, and you kind of go, okay, it's going to be a pain in the butt. I got to make sure that I got enough water and that I properly attire myself and that kind of thing. Whatever, no big deal. And for most of us in these low-lying areas along the Gulf Coast, that's the attitude. Storms come and go. They've been coming and going since before we were even around. It's no big deal. And so for me and my family, we had decided to pack up just a couple of days of items. We pack up a few days of items, and we don't return in full form to our homes. Like me and my wife, for example, we don't go back home until, ugh, I want to be correct about this. I think we didn't get. I know I've written this somewhere else, like years ago. I should know this by heart now. But I think we don't get back into our house till like June of the following year. The storm takes place August of 2005, and we don't get back into the house until June of 2006. And in the interim, we wind up staying in a series of hotels, apartments, apartment houses. Travels take us from North Louisiana to Eastern Texas to the so-called West Bank of New Orleans to various places. And I have a very specific memory of fleeing town the day or two before the storm happens. And I remember being at a gas station because um, when you evacuate a major metropolitan area, it turns out that the traffic is so severe that a 4 hour drive takes over a day, like 24 hours. We actually slept in the car that night, traveling out of the city before the storm got there. And I remember being at a gas station, probably in Louisiana, although maybe I'm conflating this with a later incident in Texas that happened, thinking about how the upheaval in my own life would reverberate through all the lives of everybody that I was close to. And me being a romantic, like an old school John Donne, Longfellow romantic, I was thinking about, and again, I'm just 27 years old. I'm thinking about like all the young people, the high school students and college young lovers who may never see each other again. They've been separated by the storm. Now, why am I saying all this? Well, it was the case, and it was more of a case than I could have imagined, because it turns out that when an American city is basically destroyed, when I say destroyed, what I mean is that the water um, flooded 80% of the city. So imagine wherever you are, 80% of the city or town that you are is just taken out. If you're in New York City, for example, it's as if everything, above, I don't know, like Chelsea, is just like, flooded, something like that. Or if you're in LA, it's like Venice Beach is fine, but everything else is in big trouble. It turns out that when it happens, that's the kind of thing that will affect people in different levels, but it will affect everybody in some level. So if, for example, you're a New Orleanian at that time, somebody from the city who has a lot of resources, and I knew some of these people. These are people who they were wealthy from old line families, had been there for generations, had a lot of money. They were lawyers. They had great insurance. They had a lot of contacts that sort of helped themselves out. Those people, for the most part, who lived in the highest part of town, which is where the wealthy houses are, along, say, St. Charles Avenue and along the river, the worst damage they got for the most part was, you know, some shingles off the roofs, maybe a bit of a leak, that sort of thing that may have damaged a bedroom. A tree maybe it hit a window, knocked it out, maybe hit a car, that kind of thing. And then there are the people who had almost no resources, which was probably the majority of people in the city, because New Orleans, I don't know the exact population what we were at that time, but I'm just going to say ballpark about a half million people. Um, and that would mean that probably about 390,000 people in the city were African American, and a lot of folks were short of resources. Now, most folks left the city. You caught a bus, you caught a plane, you hopped in a car with your people, whatever you did, you got out. Many didn't. And you can watch the documentaries to see some of the videos of that stuff, which is so disturbing. I think what always gets me about that moment in time is how so much of people trying to survive was characterized as looting. Imagine there is literally water up to your waist in your entire neighborhood. The power is out. Your fridge has been flooded, and you leave your family behind. You wade downtown to one of the stores to get, bread, meat before it spoils because the power's out, right? You get these things, you want to bring it back, but you're stopped by, who knows, a vigilante who thinks they're like Batman or whatever like that. Those things are happening. In that first week, so many people that were in town, that were still in town, were holed up in the Superdome Convention Center. And it occurs to me, looking at things, I'll go to a higher level now, out of the personal to a higher level, that so much of America is this mixture of two things. It is a place that, on the one hand, professes opportunity for all, but also denies opportunity to other people. The people who got left behind in the city were not left behind by mistake. They were trapped, both literally and structurally. Structurally, in terms of, oh, they can't afford insurance, and so therefore they can't afford to leave their home, or were shut their jobs to provide enough pay to leave town. Especially when your boss is like, "Hey, if we're open on Monday or Tuesday, you better be here." But also literally, many, many stories of people being blocked from crossing the bridge to the West Bank where there was higher ground, those kinds of things. When the storm happened those years ago, this is before I really became a writer. I was dabbling. I was writing things, but I certainly wouldn't have called myself a writer. I didn't know what I really cared about in writing. Within a few years of that, I was part of a writing group, and I was writing very regularly. And as a writer, I think I figured out relatively quickly that you should write about the things that are important, big, you can't stop thinking about. And I recall having a thought, probably a couple of years later, let's say 2007 or 8, that somebody's going to write about this in a way that is going to clarify things and crystallize views, and they'll do very well. In the back of my head, I thought maybe it's me. Maybe I'll be that writer. But of course, I needed a lot more time to get my level of skill up, so it wasn't going to be me at all. But it was people like Jessamine Ward with Salvage the Bones, or Sarah Broom with the Yellow House, both of whom wrote amazing books about the experiences related to Hurricane Katrina, and won major prizes, sold a lot of copies, those kinds of things. Today's topic is really something that I've had a hard time wrapping my mind around. On the one hand, I think that I have a bit of a firefighter's mentality. You know, People can choose how they respond to things like tragedy and trauma and pain. I did a piece that got a very interesting reaction about a week ago. The title was something along the lines of, "Yes, you must use your trauma in your writing." And it's its own topic. Check it out. It's on the feed. Have fun with that. I believe personally, as I said in that piece, that everybody has the right to approach the difficulty of their lives, however it makes sense for them to approach those things. I don't fault anybody for being Johnny or Jane on the spot, like just writing about this constantly, nor do I fault anybody for avoiding it. But I have to interrogate myself because, as a creative person, as Shakespeare said, know thyself. And I think looking back now with 20 years of clarity, having told myself that I would write about Katrina one day and do it in depth, whether it be successful or not, who knew? I'm a little surprised I haven't written more about it than I have. Now, I said at the outset I've written a lot of pieces, and in fact, I'm going to share a piece in today's feed. You can find it in the notes. Um, One of my favorite pieces of all time. I'll get back to that in a second. But I just think I imagined I would take more time and go into it in a book length project. You know what I did? I wrote the essays. As I said, I've done essays for the LA Times. I've done essays for Time Magazine. I have done a piece for Unfathomable City. I've done pieces for art magazines and Southern magazines. But fictionally, I thought that I avoided it. And as somebody who doesn't see myself as an avoidant type person and who could, in the sort of rude sense think, don't be a coward, don't avoid the hard stuff, Maurice. Again, I'm surprised I haven't done it more. In fact, when I think about it, maybe the only time I really addressed it directly, like it's not shielded in the fictional space, is in my second book. I'll show it to you here. This is the ARC, the advanced reader copy of it. This is my second book. Those of you familiar with this book know that there's several covers for it. There's the cover with like the hand on it like that, with the flowers in front of the Creole cottage. This is the hardcover version, although this is not hardcover. But this is my short story collection. I know it's kind of hard to see in this bright light. Pardon me. There we go. Yeah. The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You. So this book has 19 stories, and quiet is kept. I began writing these stories as early as 2007, and it wasn't published until August of 2021. The story of writing those stories is a long and complicated one, but suffice it to say, it encompasses a lot of periods of my life, from being a young writer in the wild by myself to being a writer that's part of a writing group to somebody who's in the MFA program, getting my skills up, to the pros program period, to what's going on, can I get this thing done? But there's a story I wrote called Mercury Forges, which honestly is probably my most popular reading piece. I have a lot of things to read from my novels and other short stories, but I have to say that more often than not, when I read that piece, the in-room, in-person, live response is often the most powerful response. And if you haven't read it, I'll just say that it's a story that is literally set the day after Katrina. It's set in New Orleans, and the main character is a prisoner who has he's in the middle of it. I mean, it's the thick of things. It doesn't get much worse than that. And it's funny because it's one of the more profound stories I've written. But what's funny about it is that the story is only about 2 pages long. I didn't know I was going to do this, but I put my phone up right here. Okay, I want to show you this. Um, One of my, so as you probably know, I'm a creative writing professor. I teach at LSU. One of my students, um, who I taught about 2.5 years ago, she's now a teacher in New Orleans. And just this morning, which is day before Katrina's anniversary. She sent me um, a picture of some drawings that her students at the high school had made. And what are the drawings of? Is their interpretations of my main character, the title character, Mercury Forges, the book itself, The Once I Said They Love You. And it's very touching. Sometimes as a writer, you get these responses from people in the world. Um, but why am I bringing this up? I think I'll probably call today's episode Meet the Moment or something like that. And what I mean is this, and it's there's something to be said for bearing witness. I once had a really awful boss, just not a good guy, not a great boss. But that being said, he is probably the boss I learned the most from. And this was a guy who had all these sort of like philosophies and one-liners, and he would read like motivational books. He was kind of broy, even though he wasn't physically imposing. He had that kind of bro mentality. And I remember one time he would criticize everybody constantly. It really got old. He was criticizing me. And you'd have the impression he wasn't even talking to you because he had probably said it many times before. But what he said to me was, and I'll paraphrase it, was something to the effect of, Maurice, you can't afford to give 70% because you're not that good at what you do. The truth of the matter is, if you have 100%, you might just do good enough to be pleasing to me as your boss. And what's worse than that is, a lot of folks think they are giving 100%. They're not even giving half of it, 50% or whatever like that. And it's one of those things where you hear something that sticks in your head because even though you're annoyed and insulted by it, there's a truth to it. I wasn't in the dome. I wasn't in the convention center. I left town days before the storm, but lost my house, and dozens of people in my family and other loved ones lost their homes from that experience. And many of them never came back. I witnessed the gentrification that the city of New Orleans experienced, which meant that 100,000 African Americans were pushed out again for structural and practical reasons. Some came back, most didn't come back. They went to places like Houston and Atlanta and far field places like Hawaii, Alaska, Canada, you name it. I lived in the city for all those years after Katrina. I got back there into the city in those months where there was literally not a single stoplight working in the entire city. They had to put up those physical red stop signs and keep us up for a long time because there was no lights that was running. Um, I witnessed it. I witnessed institutions that had been around for a long time go away. I saw new places come in, some that were wonderful and great, and some that were questionable and actually quite damaging. I've seen the population of the city swell with the newcomers and then shrink to the point where here in 2025, New Orleans is now the fastest shrinking city in America for a lot of reasons.
Your Oh, podcast timer is
my
done.
podcast timer is done. Didn't know that. Give me a second to slow this thing down.
Your podcast timer is done.
Who would have thought it? This guy over here. Echo, stop playing. Thank you. I'm not sure why I got up. I could do that before instead of getting up. But anyways, what I was saying was this. I witnessed all those changes to my city, and I witnessed all those changes to my own life. And although I'm a storyteller, and I had the desire in my heart to tell a big story, epic story about that experience, to this point, To be brutally honest, I've not quite been able to do that. But there is some light because the work that I have produced, my first novel, We Cast a Shadow, for example, my latest novel, The American Daughters, the book I'm writing right now that's due out next year, most likely. Those things all engage with what I and many others experienced at the time. What I'm trying to say is that I think that it's important for us as creative people, as artists whose job is to hold that mirror up to society and say, this is who we are, for us all to be as engaged as possible because even trying our best, we would probably fall short because we're human, right? As I said in I think my Wednesday post for paid subscribers, um, what the storm did for me, very specifically, be as direct as possible about this, is that it changed the trajectory of my life. I have spoken about myself becoming a writer many times in the past, including earlier in today's episode, as if it was what's that fancy French phrase? It's like fait accompli or something like that. Like it was just going to happen anyway. But the truth of the matter is, I was good enough and confident enough and arrogant enough that if Katrina had not happened, I might have persisted as an attorney and not a writer and walked that path for the rest of my days. Because Katrina broke everything, or broke most things, it forced me to reassess my own life and my own time on this earth. I realized that feeling of stasis that people in their 20s tend to have, the way things are right now, is how it's always going to be, was an illusion. And it got me off my butt. It got me moving. It was Hurricane Katrina that inspired me to co-found and join a writers group, and a second writers group. It was Katrina that convinced me to go back to grad school. It was Katrina that had me writing short stories in my law office when I should have been like doing something else. The storm forced me to be present in my own life and to see what it really is. In some strange way, ever since then, I found it impossible to ignore what's happening, to bury my head in the sand, and to avoid things that are just not that pleasant. What I've become is the kind of person and writer who looks at everything the best I can and transform those experiences, my life experiences, into the writing work that I've done over the years. And so I know that this is a hard time for a lot of people, especially with there being so much coverage, and especially the case that so much of the coverage is so glib. One of the pieces I mentioned earlier, the one that I did for the LA Times, was about the hurricane that hit Houston back around 2017, I think it was. And in that piece, the main point I made, or one of the main points I made, it was basically me talking to the residents of Houston in their time of need and saying, look, I've been here, we've been here, and what I can tell you is you're getting a lot of attention right now. It's going to go away. And at that point, it's going to be up to you and your people to figure out how to move forward in this situation. And so while it is annoying that all these major publications have been posting stuff constantly and running videos, and there's this thing dropping and that thing dropping, and I get that that can be very disturbing. Look, I haven't watched any of the new documentaries. I don't plan to. It's just a choice. But what I have found great solace in is being in community with people from the community and people from outside of the community that love New Orleans. Just the other day, I did a great event at Baldwin and Company bookstore, which is a perfect example of a place that wasn't there back in the day that has made my city so much better. And at that event, it was Clavis Natera's event for her book, The Grand Paloma Resort. It was a good sized audience. It was like 90% ladies, and we just had the greatest time. We were just kikiing and joking around and being inappropriate. And that's very much the spirit of New Orleans. The jazz funeral, the second line, the idea that when death comes to bear on Us in the city, we celebrate. We don't mourn, we don't cry, or rather, we pay respect to what's been lost. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is this: I don't know if I'll ever quite have the strength or the tenacity to put out some epic tome, whether fictional or non fictional, about the experience of being a New Orleanian who has had to confront and contend with Katrina, which was both a natural disaster and a man made catastrophe on so many levels, where the levees broke and racists were killing black folks and the government was incompetent and all these things happening. But I do know that, having watched my people in my city over these past 20 years, I've seen what we've been the entire time, well before Hurricane Katrina, which is that we are loving and we are good and we are intelligent and we know how to love each other so much. And so in today's post, I'm not really telling anybody out there that's hearing this what to do or how to respond to anything. I'm just saying that for me personally, the reason why I'm able to do what I do now as an author is as a result of the love given to me by my folks. And so on that note, I just want to leave you with this. Whether you want to or not, you are who you choose to be. Some folks get nervous when things are too good. Many of us get nervous when things are not that good. We run, we hide, we avoid. Those are all natural human responses. But as a writer or a painter or any artist, what you can do is take a moment to reflect. Meet that moment with all of the love that's been put and poured into you over time and give something back. Give back to the people that have given so much to you. It's quite possible that that kind of pain, the pain of losing a place, a people, a time, never goes away. And I can't say that's okay, but I can say that I'm still here. I've got a lot of work to do. If you're with me, well, if you're with me, get to your work. All right, y'all. That's it for Sitting in Silence. If you have appreciated what I've said today, please like or drop a comment. I'd like to hear that you're out there. Look, if you know anybody from New Orleans who you're friends with, you know online, send a nice note to them. Just say hello. Hope you're doing well. Um, if you want to support Sitting in Silence, be a paid subscriber. It really helps out a lot. And I am eternally grateful for anybody who does that. Share today's show. Drop a link. Send it in a DM. Text it to somebody. Very helpful. And on that, I'm going to leave here and I'm going to go do some events in the city, both at Loyola and at NOCA, and see my folks and commune. This has been Maurice Carlos Ruffins, Sitting in Silence. Oh, one more thing. There's a podcast that I've been listening to for a long time. It's called History of the 20th Century. And the host always does that. He gets through the entire show, does like a wrap up, and he goes, oh, and one more thing. He's a great podcaster. So shout out to him in doing that. Whatever you do, make sure that you're kind to yourself, that you share that kindness with somebody else, because they need it. We all need it. Toodles. Love y'all so much.